Leslie entered Fairmont Crest not as someone begging for admission but as the one who resets the rules of the game, carrying signed sponsorship sheets, naming right clauses drafted by a top legal team, a scholarship fund bearing her name with a quarterly disbursement timeline, and a renovation blueprint so meticulous that any board would have to bow to it. She did not seek a seat at the table. She built a new one, laying out figures capable of turning every vote into a ritual for legitimizing power. Her movements were quiet yet heavy, like an underground current that rechannels a riverbed without making a sound. Closed-door meetings unfolded in the club's oak parlor until dawn, where signatures fell to paper like chess pieces landing on precisely chosen squares. Anita and Nicole believed they had front-row seats reserved to witness her expulsion, having even whispered to the chair and 2 disciplinary members to ensure a smooth resolution. But on the morning of the public announcement about the gym and locker wing overhaul, a new brass plaque gleamed with Leslie's name carved where no one could miss it, a statement that every financial gate from this moment would pass through her. Anita's freefall in the stomach and Nicole's sense of humiliation stacked atop each other as they realized that at the exact second they thought they had won, the money stream had quietly veered and swept the board along to Leslie's side. From that moment, every thank you postcard sent to members bore Leslie's signature. Every charity auction featured a lot donated by her at the prime bidding hour, and every internal bulletin accidentally spotlighted her initiatives as the newest bright point. Leslie's strength was not noise but timing. She poured the scholarship fund just as the club faced its audit season, pledged the tennis complex precisely when the old maintenance contract expired, and painted a vision for upgrading the main house right before golf season. Those who once shook Anita's hand now congratulated Leslie with the unruffled ease of passengers switching to the safest lifeboat in a storm. Nicole, in a manager's momentary lapse born of habitually holding the information reins, caught the board emerging from a private room clutching a thick envelope stamped with Leslie's foundation logo. The humiliation hardened into fury when she understood that the expulsion mechanism they had engineered was now neutralized by a sponsorship structure binding the club to the very woman they meant to eject. Anita, seasoned by survival instinct, pivoted to legal and media fronts at once, only to find each step preempted by Leslie's prior moves. Documents, figures, freshly allied faces on the Honor Council, always a beat ahead. The largest shadow Leslie wielded was not money but secrets. She knew who had used the club account to slice off private expenses, who had begged a reduced membership fee under hazy pretenses, who had flirted with rumors about a yacht trip bankrolled by a corporate friend. These fragments weren't hurled into headlines. They were seated like silent mines beneath the floor, triggered only when someone's posture required adjustment. Vernon, with the steadiness of an old gatekeeper, began tracing Leslie's perimeter from a small scuff in the record. The name Laura slipped into a stale medical cost ledger. He found a lakeside cottage Laura once occupied, a bank record showing periodic transfers from an anonymous fund, and a non-disclosure agreement hurriedly drafted years ago. The deeper he dug, the more he was hurled into a maze where each document opened another door, where Leslie seemed to have anticipated the pursuit and left a tangle of paths for those who dared follow. Fear arose not from finding nothing, but from finding each layer to be another sheet of slick, frozen glass beneath which something colder and heavier sank. To misdirect, Leslie floated new leaks about the Dupree family. Stories of a household blurry on family funds, hazy representational expenses, reputational bartering for privileges, kicking up local press chatter big enough to pull eyes off Laura. Anita countered with plans for a modest press conference, but the afternoon before, the club's major backers received thank-you letters from Leslie's foundation with invitations to the gala inaugurating the facility that bore her name in that vortex. Ted's tie in Leslie's hand surfaced like an unwelcome emblem. Nicole saw it not as a trivial accessory but as a blazing token of betrayal under the gallery of portraits where every frame sanctified propriety. The gap between Nicole and Ted yawned open as suspicion spread like ink in water. Ted, In a moment of confession before Eva, labeled his involvement with Leslie a lapse rather than love, a wording that only thickened the chaos. Eva, having just learned Leslie was her mother, was flung into the centrifuge of emotion as a family portrait already fragile now lost its frame. Childhood photos became questions. Each memory slipped from its old meaning. Her inner life was stretched taut between a need for protection and the ache of being used as a chess piece in a power war. She could not deny Leslie's might, yet that very force shone like high beams into her own dark corners, forcing her to ask where she stood among those who had defined her life with secrets. Reading the psychology like a script, Leslie staged the gala as a flawless performance. The music was tastefully restrained, the expensive wine poured on cue, the presentation flooded with figures of social impact, life-changing scholarships, playgrounds opening to neighborhood children. Every camera angle framed Leslie as attentive, insightful, magnanimous. Beneath the score, other lines hummed. An anonymous email with the naming rights contract and a decade-long binding clause. An interior design invoice inflated twofold through a friendly contractor. A money flow diagram washing from an outside fund into a shell company and back in as sponsorship. Anita gripped these fragments like blades, knowing that swinging at the wrong moment would cut her first. Nicole, incandescent with the image of the tie, demanded an independent audit. The board, now saturated with Leslie's commitments, stalled with procedural pauses. Vernon, calmer, filed for preservation of the club's camera data and prepared subpoenas, while quietly hunting Laura, who might connect the deepest ice layer to the surface where everyone breathed. Laura's shadow began to take shape, no longer rumor but a contour drawn by details. She had once managed a community program that collapsed after an unusual inspection. Records showed a hefty deposit into the fund days before the program's dissolution, and the signatory acknowledging receipt was Laura. Then came the NDA, a long medical stipend, a lakeside house paid in cash, and a vanishing act from public life. Vernon's questions punched a hole in the ice, letting a rush of cold water shock the game's nervous system. If Laura had borne the weight for someone, that someone might be Leslie. If Laura had been bought into silence, the hush might be the barter that returned Leslie as an irreplaceable node in the power ecosystem. As if reading the inquiry, Leslie tossed a fresh fog over the Duprees, this time with stories of blended personal and public funds, undocumented representational costs, pulling local media into another world large enough to shield Laura from direct sight. The conflict slid toward court before the principals fully realized it. Anita filed for a temporary injunction to freeze the naming rights provisions on grounds of conflict of interest and a process derailed by material inducements. Nicole amplified the public front with a statement centering on standards and organizational integrity while rallying for an independent audit. Leslie answered with a thick dossier asserting procedural cleanliness and a list of major donors ready to pull out if the project stalled, turning the injunction into an immediate threat to the club's cash flow. Ted, caught in crossfire, tried to salvage a silhouette of ethics by proposing an evaluation committee, but the phantom of his tie in Leslie's hand stained every gesture with doubt. Eva, wavering, visited the newly christened wing one late night, running her fingers over the brass plaque as if the chill of metal might give shape to her new, suffocating bond with the woman unsettling the entire community. The night before the hearing, a sequence of events drove everyone to the ledge. The club's data archive glitched for 2 hours exactly when Leslie met 2 board members. The inflated design contract leaked to a local blog. A grainy photo of a Laura-like figure leaving the lakeside cottage hit Vernon's inbox. Someone wanted to yank the cord faster or fray the hand that held it. Leslie convened a private huddle with top donors, insisting the project could not pause, personally guaranteeing to backstop losses, and hinting at an even more ambitious Phase 2 if they cleared this turbulence. Anita gathered with counsel to weld new fragments into a pattern proving manipulation. though everything still looked like shards demanding a tight, logical weave. Nicole drafted a statement leaning hard on accountability, ready to forfeit some funding if that's what it took to honor process, even as such language threatened to tear the relationships she had spent years nodding. On the morning of the hearing, Fairmont Crest held its breath. Outside the courthouse, one cluster of members called for transparency, while another defended the project for community benefit. Inside, the air thickened with new paper and wet ink. Leslie presented unblemished, sketching a panorama of social impact, youth opportunity, and the duties of those who can afford to help. Anita laid out her chain of conflicts, murky transactions, and process warped by money. Nicole struck the chord of organizational ethics. Vernon, almost inaudible but implacable, demanded data preservation and Laura's subpoena, threading a timeline that forced heads to pivot from page to page. Eva sat quietly in the gallery, her heart a stone. She saw each person shouldering a private boulder, Leslie lugging power and secrets, Anita bearing fury and duty, Nicole carrying the institution's honor, Vernon the obligation to locate truth, Ted the weakness newly exposed, and she herself the questions of blood, trust, and future. No immediate ruling arrived, but the waiting itself was its own judgment. No one left lighter. Leslie kept her serene mask, eyes measuring the distance to a next mechanism that would lash the project tighter to the club's fate. Anita walked out with clenched hands, knowing no victory would count unless the slab labeled Laura flipped. Nicole looked up into a gray sky and asked herself the true price of cleanliness when everything around her rested on latticed interests. Vernon returned to his desk, unfurled the lake map, invoices, statements, blurred photos, and began to fit them, because he knew the vent in the ice hid where no one wanted to look. Ted went back to an empty room where the tie had become the cord tugging his honor to snapping point. Eva stood before the glass long enough to watch her face age with truth and brighten with a fresh freedom, because she understood that only by taking the storm full on does a person learn how long they can stand upright. And Fairmont Crest, after promises and accusations, after wine and paper, after brass plaques and moral lines, kept turning on its old axles. Money, honor, secrets. Donations still flowed, no longer cool water but tributaries running through minefields where each step could ignite. Secrets still sat, no longer asleep in drawers but breathing under wood. Honor still got spoken, no longer a common lexicon but a private language each translated to suit their interests. Leslie's rise wasn't merely a win. It was a stress test on a community that once believed everything could be solved with a handshake and a gala. Laura's shadow stretched across the lake, suggesting debts that money cannot settle and promises that cannot hang off a brass plate. As the sun sank behind the hill, everyone understood the war had left the ballroom and entered the courthouse corridor, where truth was no evening dress and guilt no crown, where each person must prove not only that they are right, but that they deserve to exist inside the new order Leslie has begun to erect with both her treasure chest and her bottomless vault of secrets. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. All the content I make is just speculation and personal sharing. If you find the video interesting and useful, please support me with a like and leave a comment. If you have better ideas or more interesting speculations, please share them in the comments section for everyone to discuss. I appreciate all your contributions and support. Sincerely, thank you.